I'm Eveline Lubbers. I'm Dutch but working in the UK by now. I've been involved in monitoring police and intelligence since the 80s. I was an active squatter in Amsterdam back in the days. What I will talk about briefly is our work as the Undercover Research Group, and I will talk a bit about the Pitchford inquiry. Well, as you all know, it started with the brand of the undercover policing scandal, the exposure of Mark Kennedy. Since 50 more undercovers have been exposed, each of them lived the life of an activist for about 5 years. And the STS, the Special Demonstration Squad, and the various names they operated under since, have been doing this since 1968, since the establishment was afraid that the anti-Vietnam War demonstration would get violent or would mean revolution or whatever. We all know about the use of the birth certificates of children who died young, the long-term relationships. What did that get us? Eventually, the undercover policing inquiry. How did we get there? What I think is crucial, what is very clear this afternoon, is that the undercovers were exposed by the people who were targeted. It started with women who went looking for the lovers that disappeared, because after the 5 years the undercovers would always disappear. Mark Kennedy was exposed by a woman who he had a relationship with, who found the power to sort of start an investigation with friends after they no longer trusted him anymore. All the stories came into the public domain with the help of journalists, mainly by The Guardian, Rob Evans and Paul Lewis, who write a book. A whistleblower that eventually came forward. That all these exposures, all these scandals led to about a dozen internal police inquiries. Most of them remained secret, but the pressure kept building up. Again and again, new stories would come out, and eventually one of those reviews, the Ellison Review, confirmed that Doreen and Neville Lawrence, the parents of Stephen Lawrence, had been spied upon by this same unit during their campaign for justice about the murder of their son Stephen Lawrence. What we do, the Undercover Research Group, we are a sort of a small network of people who were involved in those first exposures. We still investigate people who have the suspicions of people who come to us, but of course our work is based on the work that has been done before by people like Helen and Alison, who did not know something like this existed. Now we know, so that is an entirely different story. What we also want to do, we do not only investigate suspicions, but we do want to map out the broader network behind the undercover officers, the people who were responsible for that, the people who supervised these units, and further down the road, the people who said this was okay. I will tell you a little bit about how we investigate undercovers, how people that come to us with their suspicions, how we work with them. What I think is very important is that all the stories that are coming out now could create a lot of paranoia and a lot of fears and a lot of negative effects on activism. We think it's very important that if there are suspicions, you do a proper investigation, and you do it fast, and you do it with a small group. Never go pointing fingers at people or spread rumors, because then sort of you're doing the work that the police would like to do. It can be very destructive. We kind of developed a method based on the research experience of the first 15 cases. We sort of analyzed the tradecraft of the undercovers, and we summarized them in 15 questions. 15 questions that you can start with. If you have suspicions that someone in your group is or has been an undercover, if you check all the boxes of our questions, that doesn't mean that you have an undercover. It means that a further investigation is necessary. I can tell you a bit about our investigation into Carlo Neri, who we exposed earlier this year in January. People of the socialist parties, of our anti-racist groups, came to us. After Mark Kennedy was exposed, others were exposed, they sort of recognized the pattern and thought those 15, after we published the 15 questions, they really thought, like, we might have a case here. So what we did, we talked to about 20 people who had known Carlo Neri, who worked with him. He had several relationships in the 5 years that he was undercover. People he lived with, people he rented houses of. What we are looking for when we talk to all those people is to have a sort of better answers to those 15 questions. If he fits the framework that we've built, which is not, of course, a fit structure. There's always exceptions, there's differences. We want to know the role the undercover played, his profile, the positions he had, but also we're very curious for official details, records, the addresses he was registered, the names of family members, photographs. Why do we want that? Because one of the things is we try to locate someone. He disappears, and we kind of want to disprove that someone was an undercover. So if, there's all kind of reasons why people are active for several years and then they move on with their life, they get married or they move or whatever. So if we are able to, which we have had for several times as well, if we are able to find someone and see that he lives alive, we can disprove someone has been an undercover. Also, what we have learned is that most of the undercovers use details from their real life. Carlo Neri, for instance, it was difficult to try and find him. We went a long way around. We even looked for policemen, maybe now in another part of their career, with an Italian background, because he was called Carlo, he had an Italian background. We even zoomed in on someone who turned out to have a completely different role in the police, and we found someone who knew him because he was investigating sex offenders and could disprove that he was our guy, because he looked very different. So we only found him for the time that he was active. We knew he was active. He was registered at several addresses. And he made a mistake because he registered under his real name at the address of his last partner. Because this guy he made even more of a mess of the lives he played with. He disappeared with the third partner he had while he was undercover. So he also left his wife. Apparently he needed an official address, and he used her address. So then we had his last name, his real last name, and then we could look up that family. It was a very special Italian name. We found out that he had used the name of his sister, even the name of his kid, the name, his father, his mother. He had used all their real names. With that, we could look up his official records. We found the birth certificates of his kids and his marriage certificate, which said that he was a police officer. And his second child was born while he was undercover, so we knew he was a police officer while he was active with the Socialist Party. So then, to finish this up, we discussed with the group involved how, they of course want control over the story, how it goes out, what doesn't go out. we had a splash in Newsnight and in The Guardian, which was good. We sort of gave the story to them. But then, of course, Newsnight didn't really acknowledge it. They said, on their website, it said it was a joint investigation of The Guardian and Newsnight, which wasn't really the case. Well, this is the way it works. We think it's very important to publish all the details. We've got a blog where we've explained how we found him out. We've got a sort of a portal of our own, a wiki website, where we have put his profile up. So the result in this case was 2 of his former partners were accepted by the public inquiry as core participants. We think it's very important to continue to come with these kind of stories, to keep putting pressure on the inquiry, because they, and I will come back later, we'll come back to that, they tend to sort of narrow the focus of their investigation, and we want justice for all the people that have been spied upon. So now we have the Undercover Police and Inquiry. This is their official logo. I've summarized the remits of the inquiry. I can't go into too much detail, but what is very important, one thing is that they want to focus on what the police, these specific units have done in England and Wales. And the English and Welsh police forces, this is a serious sort of limitation to the inquiry. Won't go through all the other things. This is sort of a summary of the remits. Why we think it is important to include the actions of undercovers abroad is that we've got 15 undercovers now. Half of them worked abroad in 17 different countries over 25 years. The list you see here is just where Mark Kennedy went. We've got a longer list at our website. We've seen Allison's holidays all over, which you think they weren't operations, but it was being abroad. So not including all the actions of the undercovers abroad is a serious limitation. We know that Mark Kennedy and other undercovers went to the protest against the G8 in Heiligendamm. We also know that German undercovers came to the G8 in Stirling, and with all the undercovers that were active at the time in the UK. We have found out through questions in the German parliament that there is a coordination group of undercover activities at the EU level. In Scotland is special, of course, because only a few years ago the organizations of the police have been split up. And we can see that the top police officers they have over there come from the same pool of people who made a career in the UK, and several of them have been implicated in, having had a past as the head of special branch during the time that they had several known undercovers. So there is a pressure now in Scotland to either have Scotland included in the Pitchford inquiry, or several members of parliament there want to have an inquiry into undercover policing of their own. What we have seen, what we think is a very serious limitation of the Pitchford inquiry, if you look at all the people who applied for what they call core participancy to be accepted into the inquiry, if you look at the rulings, it's not sort of completely black and white, but there seems to be a preference for people who already have proof that they've been spied upon. So they have proof of close involvement with undercovers. And we think this is kind of weird, because the people who already have proof of having been spied upon, they know because of our, not the Undercover Research Group, but the activist investigations themselves. So it's without those investigations, without those exposures, there wouldn't have been an inquiry in the first place. So it's kind of weird to focus on the people who already have proof. Well, you could make a case that the people who have serious suspicions, those are the cases that should have to be investigated. So we are very afraid that this will limit the scope of the inquiry. That's why, and as I think Harriet mentioned it before, Hellison mentioned it before, it's very important for the police or the inquiry to release the cover names used by the undercover officers. That wouldn't interfere with their privacy because it's their false names, but then we can go back and we can see if those names have they been active years ago. Then you would get a better idea of the scope of the infiltration over the years. There's also a list mentioned in one of the internal reviews, police reviews, or a list of groups that have been spied upon, of more than 400 groups. That list should be made public as well, because then we can understand and we can investigate more, and the inquiry can investigate more of who have sort of the scope of the entire operations. This might be a bit too far, but further limitations, there's of course how everything has to be paid, how the legal support has to be paid. So the inquiry decided to make up categories. I think Doreen and Neville Lawrence are a category of their own. The categories are a bit weird. So what's the difference between social and environmental activists and political activists? If you see that there's political organizations and politicians as well, it is a sort of we're a bit afraid that by throwing together too many groups and too many cases, chances are that not everybody will be able to come out with their story. The most important limitation, and Harriet already talked about this, we've had a hearing a few weeks ago about how much is going to be disclosed and how much is going to be held how much of the hearings are going to be held behind closed doors. The ruling on that is expected early May, and we think that the success of the Pitchford inquiry kind of depends on what the outcome of this is going to be. It could be if Pitchford the police is sort of throwing the toys out. They want everything behind closed door. They even make the case that if you have all the hearings behind closed doors, and if you would have the end report, if you would publish that would still be a public inquiry. And this sort of, it follows the line that we've seen during the court case, during, even when we exposed Carlo Nero, we know he's a police officer. People, women have been accepted by the public inquiry. They still hold on to the neither confirm nor deny. We can't say whether he was a police officer. They will continue to do that. So I think it's very important to sort of continue to do research and to continue to come with these stories, to put a pressure on the inquiry. It's not, if I say we, I talk about the Undercover Research Group, but also we don't work alone. We see ourselves as a part of the campaign opposing police surveillance. We work with all these groups. What we try to do, we try to do all kind of things, not just expose undercovers, but we try to map out the broader network. We've also set up another project, which is called the Special Branch Files Project. We invite the journalists to share the files that have been released under the Freedom of Information Act, and we focus on the spying. So we have files on spying on the anti-apartheid movement. We have other stories, as you can see, and we've used, I'm very proud of this project. What you can see is that we've put them on Document Cloud, and you can make windows where you see parts of the real documents, and when you click on them, you get into the real document. It's very nice. Have a look at it. Well, this is one of the ways. One of the sort of we try and if Picture is not going to work, we may set up our own. Not we all together. We may set up our own set of hearings. There's all kind of plans. I'm kind of rushing through this because we're running out of time. Meanwhile, support us. We're on Twitter. We've got our website. And a bit of commercial. I've written some books. They're here. They're for sale. That was my story. Thank you.